So you were down in the secret lounge the other day? If you didn't get the opening joke, don't feel bad. I'll explain it later in the video, as well as how it ties into a push to get a Canadian actor cast as the next Wolverine in the MCU. As you may have guessed, today is all about our neighbors to the north. Canada! And their very own team of superheroes, Alpha Flight. Alpha Flight was the brainchild of Canada's own writer-artist extraordinaire, John Byrne. Byrne is one of the greatest creators of the 1980s. While he was writing and drawing Alpha Flight, he was doing the same for Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four. Check out this video if you want to dive into Byrne's FF run. But it was actually Dave Cockrum, the artist who preceded Byrne on X-Men, that planted the seed for what would become Alpha Flight. Wolverine was the result of a secret weapons project sponsored by the Canadian government, and Cockrum suggested that they would be none too pleased to have their most powerful resource lost to the US. He felt like the Canadians would send someone to bring him back, so Byrne reached into his sketchbooks from his fan days and brought out the design for Guardian. Marvel wouldn't let Byrne use the name, as they were publishing a Guardians of the Galaxy comic. Not the same guys you're thinking of. So several names were floated around, including Major Maple Leaf, until they settled on the equally uninspired Weapon Alpha, who first appeared in X-Men 109 trying to bring Wolvie home. He failed miserably. So Byrne reached back into his old sketchbook and pulled out designs for Shaman and Snowbird, as well as creating new characters such as Sasquatch, and the twins, Aurora and North Star. The team now known as Alpha Flight, led by a renamed Vindicator, another moniker Byrne despised, battled the X-Men for Wolverine in issues 120 and 121. Their mission was a failure in the comics, but they were a smash success with the readers. Byrne freely admits he didn't really care for the characters. They were just throwaways with enough backstory to stand toe-to-toe with the X-Men. But the fans had spoken, and Marvel was determined to give Alpha Flight their own comic series. Byrne at first resisted, but he realized that if he didn't do it, someone else was going to play with his creations, so he finally relented. What he created, however, was far from a traditional superhero team. It was more a bunch of psychologically fractured souls loosely joined together. Comic creator and historian Fred Van Lent said, "Alpha Flight took high-angst melodrama and cranked the dial to 11. It's what happens when the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders tries to cosplay." None of that mattered. The first issue was a smash success, selling over 500,000 copies, and giving Byrne the creative power to take the book in any direction he chose. But perhaps the best way to analyze this comic series is to look at the action figures it spawned. Let's start with the team leader, Weapon Alpha, Guardian. Took a while to get there, but they finally got it right. James Mac McDonald was still Vindicator in the first issue of Alpha Flight, a name provided by Chris Claremont after the fighter jets of the same name. But John Byrne hated it, arguing, "What did Canada have to vindicate?" No, much like Captain America, this character is literally wrapped in the Canadian flag. It is only right that he be named for the stirring final line of the Canadian national anthem, "O Canada, we stand on guard for thee." But as much as I love this design, there just isn't much to the character himself. Byrne knew it too, and he began planting the seeds for the character's ultimate fate right from the get-go. Issue 12 was my very first Alpha Flight comic book, with its cover promising the death of one of the team members. I grabbed it off the spinner rack right here, the garden spot, 1 block away from my grandparents' house. Look at this, how can you not instantly fall in love with these characters? But as Guardian made a risky move to defeat Omega Flight and end the battle, he was left in a race against time as his own suit was about to explode. Byrne built the tension using the panel borders to count down the seconds left, and just as Guardian was about to complete his task, his wife Heather accidentally interrupted, and Guardian was killed, leaving nothing behind but a smoldering pile of ash. This blew my 11-year-old mind, and is likely why I'm so fascinated with the character today. Byrne said the death of Guardian was meant to open up new storylines and to make the other characters more three-dimensional. It was emblematic of the daring storytelling risk he was willing to take. One of the characters who benefited from these new storylines was Shaman. Dr. Michael Tu Youngman hails from Calgary as a member of Canada's First Nations, the indigenous peoples of the Americas. He trained as a medical doctor, resisting the magical ways of his grandfather. But after the tragic death of his wife, he secludes himself in a cabin in Banff National Park, where he experiences a vision and goes on to study Sarsi magic. He becomes powerful enough that he is able to draw mystical items from his enchanted medicine bag at will. Byrne's stereotypical appropriation of native cultures could be problematic, but the efforts to include representatives of all of Canada's peoples carried on throughout the book. Snowbird was the third character Byrne had created prior to becoming a comics professional. Born from the Inuit goddess Nelvana, Snowbird possessed the supernatural abilities to transform into any animal native to Canada. But it came at a price. She was bound to the land, unable to leave Canada's borders for long without it proving fatal. Which is kind of ironic, because snowbirds are what we call old people who travel south for the winter to avoid the cold. The first 10 or so issues of Alpha Flight were basically solo character stories, and Snowbirds was famous for its blizzard battle, where 6 full pages were completely blank aside from lettering and sound effects. Byrne famously received his normal page rate for these, as it was deemed an artistic choice. Good luck pulling that off again. A little more down-to-earth is Puck. There were supposedly discussions about having Wolverine on the team, but those eventually went nowhere, so in his place came the scrappy Puck. Eugene Judd was an achondroplastic dwarf. Again, not your typical superhero, and certainly way ahead of his time. He was an expert gymnast and brawler, as well as the spiritual soul of the team, but his condition left him in chronic pain. His freewheeling spirit has led some to believe that the character was named after the mischievous sprite Puck in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. But John Byrne has confirmed he was named after Canada's national sport, lacrosse. Wait, that can't be right. It is? Huh. Well, he was actually named after a hockey puck. Next come the twins, Jean-Marie and Jean-Paul Boubier, better known as Aurora and North Star. Hailing from Montreal, they represented French Canadians, and would often speak to each other in their native tongue, without subtitles, a little in-joke for the bilingual readers out there. Aurora was perhaps the most psychologically fragile in this band of misfits, suffering from dissociative identity disorder. Byrne supposedly came up with Aurora's split personality after not liking how she was depicted in an issue of Machine Man that came out before the first issue of Alpha Flight. So he created her fun-loving floozy and Catholic prude personalities to explain the continuity flaw. Her twin brother North Star would have an even greater place in comics history. Look, we don't introduce Spider-Man by saying cisgender Peter Parker, he, him, was bitten by a radioactive spider, so I don't like defining North Star solely by his sexual orientation. But he was the first openly gay character to come out in a Marvel comic, and his marriage to his husband Kyle Janedu was the first depiction of a same-sex marriage in mainstream comics. North Star's sexuality was hinted at from the very first issue, and rereading them as an adult, it's not very subtle, but the Comics Code Authority, a censorship bureau that policed comics content, explicitly banned, quote, sex perversion or any inference to same, which comics scholar Hilary Shute notes is a clear reference to homosexuality. But John Byrne felt differently, saying, quote, there needs to be gays in comics because there are gays in real life, no other reason. The population of the fictional world should represent the real world. That's why I created North Star. I felt the Marvel Universe needed a gay superhero, even if I would never be allowed to say it in so many words in the comics themselves, and I felt that I should create one rather than retrofitting an existing character. John Byrne has become a proud curmudgeon over the years, with many takes that are way off base. But he was right about the need for North Star. Diving back into Canadian mythology comes Sasquatch. Walter Lankowski is from Canada's West Coast, from Vancouver, British Columbia, before heading to Penn State on a football scholarship, where he met Bruce Banner and became interested in physics and gamma radiation. P.S. That's not a good combination. He tried to recreate the conditions that turned Banner into the Incredible Hulk, but to no one's surprise, it didn't work, unleashing the ancient beast Tanarak and transforming him into the monstrous Sasquatch. After joining Alpha Flight, he tried to have a relationship with Aurora, but between her split personality and his inability to control his rage, they stood no chance. Eventually, Tanarak fully took over Sasquatch, and Snowbird had to battle her teammate, ripping out his heart to stop him. I told you, man, this team's got issues. We actually got a new Sasquatch figure from Hasbro in 2018, but I prefer the 2005 Toy Biz version because I think it more closely resembles John Byrne's original art. This brings us to Heather McNeil Hudson, wife of slain Mac Hudson and heir to Alpha Flight's leadership throne. Byrne instantly recognized that Heather was a better character than Mac. She was smart, independent, and determined, so the course was set for her to become the focus of the book. Following her husband's death, she looked gaunt and aged, but it was her unbroken spirit that held the team together. She was never intended to be a superhero, but hey, this is comics, and she eventually took up the mantle of Vindicator to honor her late husband. Fun fact, Heather was the first person in comics to call Wolverine by his actual name. But what does any of this have to do with that bit at the beginning? Well, my brothers got me watching Letterkenny, a profane, hilarious Canadian comedy on Hulu about a group of friends in a small town in Ottawa. It was created and written by star Jared Keeso, whom fans want to take over the role of Wolverine in the MCU. Check it out, and if you think this Canuck has what it takes to be Wolvie, I put a link to the petition in the description. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look at Canada's premier superhero team, Alpha Flight. As always, join in the conversation, and if you want more videos like this, give us a like and hit subscribe so you can catch all the fun from carbon scoring.